Everyone has a home park, yes, even you. Whether that park is within walking distance for you or the closest park being 5 hours away. Nonetheless, that park would still be considered your home park. Sometimes it may feel like, wow, all of these other parks are getting the tallest, fastest, craziest coaster. But things like that never come close to your home park. Well, allow me to tell you a story that occurred during the early 2000s that would rock the Southeastern United States and become the first hypercoaster in that region. Throughout the 70s and even within the early 2000s, the skyline for Six Flags Over Georgia as far as attractions was enormous. You'd see an awesome freefall ride called Freefall, the sky buckets to take you in the air from one side of the park to the other, Great American Scream Machine, which when it debuted in 1973, was the tallest coaster in the world, and greeting you from afar as you'd be driving down the I-20 highway, you'd be greeted with the Great Gasp.
Probably the most spectacular ride to be installed at Six Flags is the Great Gasp. It was our main addition in 1976 and helped boost our attendance to 2.3 million.
The Great Gasp was an Intamin power tower located at Six Flags Over Georgia. The 225-foot parachute ride debuted at the park on April 10, 1976, as the tallest ride in the park, overshadowing the Great American Scream Machine. The Great Gasp, when it hit the scene, was the only one of its kind in the world. Riders would be lifted up in the air acting as paratroopers while seated with parachutes overhead. The ride would last 28 seconds from start to finish as shooters, short for parachutists, the riders, would be awarded fright records after each ride completed. After 20 rides on the Great Gasp, riders would be awarded with the Medal of Honor for their bravery. This ride would be extremely well received and would become the park's icon for decades to come. But with Six Flags' mindset of adding newer and bigger coasters every year, change was inevitable, and the Great Gasp would fall victim. After numerous rumors and speculation throughout the late spring and early summer of 2005, it was confirmed in July of 2005 that the Great Gasp would be coming to an end, with its last gasp being on August 13th and 14th, 2005. After nearly 30 years of taking guests high in the sky, giving them a bird's eye view of Atlanta, Six Flags would eject the Great Gasp on out of there, with what was rumored to come would change the game of epic proportions. September of 2005, it was announced that a greater gasp would beckon thrill seekers in 2006, when Six Flags Over Georgia would open the largest coaster in park history. This coaster was a perfect match with the closer of the Great Gasp, with this new ride being the largest monetary investment in park history at the price tag of $20 million. One name was perfect for this coaster, that you would either conquer it or get conquered by it: Goliath. Goliath, going back to biblical times, was a Philistine warrior who possessed an immense stature, standing at a whopping 9 feet 9 inches tall, a legit giant amongst men. Goliath would be announced to come to Six Flags Over Georgia to become a giant amongst coasters.
My, look who's riding the magnet. Is pretty high. Well, what goes up must come down. Even when you see it, you won't believe it. The Magnet XL200. Get to the point.
The first hypercoaster in the world would debut at Cedar Point in 1989 and would shock the coaster world to its core. Remember how I mentioned at the beginning of this documentary that in 1973, when Great American Scream Machine opened, it scared people at 105 feet tall, where it was reported that people were afraid that they'd have heart attacks and not be able to withstand the whopping height.
I'll never get on again in my life, I swear. Well, that's what I thought it was. Lot of fun. You wouldn't want to hear what I got to say.
Well, yeah, 16 years later, the 200-foot mark was reached, and that was unheard of. Magnum XL 200 came onto the scene and broke the invisible ceiling on the possibilities of coasters. See, sometimes things such as records and ideas seem impossible until it's done. It was believed as well that it was humanly impossible for a human to run a sub 4-minute mile, and that attempting it was dangerous to one's health if they were to attempt it according to physiologists. Well, on May 6, 1954, Sir Roger Bannister did the impossible, trailblazing the way for more people to actually do it. As of nearly 2,000 athletes have been recorded to have now broken the sub 4-minute mile, and 63 American track runners in 2023 alone ran a sub 4-minute mile. On May 6, 1989, 35 years later to the exact day that Sir Roger Bannister had his great accomplishment, the first hypercoaster would open up at the 200-foot height mark to change the game, introducing the hypercoaster model to the world. More and more hypercoasters began to spring up around the globe, and by a few different manufacturers too as well. 10 years later in 1999, Apollo's Chariot, B&M's first hypercoaster, would come into play, followed by Six Flags' first hypercoaster, that being Raging Bull at Six Flags Great America. Six Flags would receive 4 hypercoasters from 1999 to 2001. Needless to say, this coaster model debuted in 1989, was hugely popular with a huge array of parks trying to grab one from throughout the early 90s till 2001. After 2001, with the exception of Silver Star that opened in 2002 at Europa Park in Germany, the push out of hypercoasters flatlined, most likely due in part to the 9/11 attacks, where tourism as a whole massively declined. The removal of the Great Gasp to make way for the now newly announced massive coaster, Melinda Ashcraft, Vice President and General Manager of the park, would go on to state that the USA section of the park will be refurbished to accommodate the ride, which in turn would also see the Intamin Ranger called Looping Starship face the defunct graveyard as well to make room for the massive footprint of Goliath. The specs and details of the ride would now be shared too as well. Goliath would have a first drop of 170 feet, 4,480 feet of track, a top speed of 70 miles per hour, be manufactured by B&M, and would stand at a max height of 200 feet. After a 5-year hiatus of no hypercoasters by any manufacturers being produced after the first wave of hypercoasters that hit the scene from 1989 to 2001, with the announcement of Goliath at Six Flags Over Georgia as their new standout coaster, would mark the beginning of the second huge wave, a resurgence of hypercoasters. After the announcement, things progressed rapidly. Construction on Goliath would begin during the 2005 season with the clearing of the land, with the last rides ever on the Great Gasp taking place in mid-August of 2005. Goliath went vertical with the lift hill being completely constructed by early November 2005. Construction would continue throughout the winter into the start of 2006. The lift hill, with its top height now completed, the first drop would take shape. By mid-January of 2006, the first half of the coaster would be completed with construction crews finishing up work on the helix. By February 2006, after 4,480 feet of track was laid, 3,400 cubic yards of concrete used in the ride's foundation, which is about the size of what a Olympic-sized swimming pool holds, poured in, the total weight of Goliath's steel track and supports weighing 1,500 tons, with a $20 million cost, the ride was completed with Goliath encompassing 8.5 acres of land. In March of that year, Six Flags would auction off first rides on eBay by listing several opportunities for buyers to become the first people to ride Goliath. The earnings from this auction would go towards Cure Childhood Cancer, Give Kids the World, and Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, with this taking place through eBay's Mission Fish charity listings. Only 12 of the top donors from the auction would have a chance to partake on the inaugural ride on March 30th, 2006, before it opened up to the general public.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Delicious things to eat.
The popcorn can't be beat. The sparkling drinks are just dandy, the chocolate bars and the candy. So let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Hey, this is Tim and
Chris.
And we're getting ready to go to Six Flags and we're totally psyched.
Yes, we are. It's totally spur of the moment. We just realized we had like an extended weekend and we had to do something. So it was either, you know, going to, what was it, Cancun? We were talking about going to Cancun, hang gliding, or going to Six Flags, spending the weekend in Atlanta, getting a season's pass to Six Flags. That way we can go as much as we want to this summer.
So do you have anything to say for the ladies out there, Chris?
Well, they're really missing out, but they wouldn't have a chance to join us anyway.
April 1st, 2006. This was no April Fool's joke. Goliath would officially open to the public with massive lines to get into the park. As it was a cool and soggy day, the anticipation was through the roof as guests flooded into Six Flags Over Georgia, storming the USA section of the park to be one of the first guests to experience the first hypercoaster in the Southeast. People linked up with friends, bonded over music playing over the intercom. Extremely long wait times were inevitable that day, but all were in good spirits. Guests who were waiting deep in the queue would pause in silence to listen to a voice over the intercom of the ride. As riders loaded onto the train, an announcement was made.
Clear the platform. Attendants 1, 5, 4, 3, and 2 ready. Ladies and gentlemen, the first public train of Goliath is clear and ready for dispatch. Dispatch.
As guests in the queue applauded, what felt like a dream was now a reality as guests inched closer and closer to take the first voyage up the 200-foot lift hill. As guests filled in the ride station, the moment of truth was here, as some that day would be so overwhelmed by the hype and intensity that would cause many to back out of fear. Those who remained in the line and didn't chicken out would finally experience the beast that is Goliath. The trains on Goliath are 9 rows deep and 4 seats wide. It has B&M's clamshell restraints that only when all 36 restraints are fastened safely, then and only then can the ride leave the station.
Alright y'all, here we go, we get ready to do this. Film it all the way. You know what I'm saying? We're gonna do it like this. I better not drop this camera, somebody gonna get their feelings hurt too. Alright y'all, over 1,000 feet up in the air, you know what I'm saying?
On the contrary, sir. Trains on Goliath embark on a steady pace up a 200-foot chain lift hill till it peaks. The first drop is exhilarating, dropping 170 feet of pure intensity, then up another airtime hill into the second drop. An interesting fact here that many do not notice or realize that Goliath is unique in many ways, but one in particular is that many coasters' first drops are usually the tallest drops, but Goliath's second drop is actually 175 feet, making it a larger drop by 5 feet than its initial first drop. After the 175-foot second drop, the coaster banks slightly to the left as riders embark on the third 129-foot camelback hill, getting massive floater airtime over the water below. The coaster then races up, hits a mini bunny hill smoothly into a very intense 540-degree downward helix that causes many riders to gray out, and some even to completely black out. As they are pressed down into their seats, feeling those G-forces hit their bodies, Goliath hits another but smaller 118-foot airtime hill, straight into an intense horseshoe element as it turns the trains to head back into the station. But wait, there's more. The coaster isn't finished just yet. After the horseshoe, riders embark on a 79-foot airtime hill over the driving path to get into the park, into another 56-foot hill, finally into one last hill of 48 feet as the coaster lands and turns left and rolls into the station. Riders just experienced the euphoric thrills of 4.1 G-forces at a top speed of 70 miles per hour. Needless to say, Goliath was very well received and was an instant hit. Goliath was well received amongst coaster enthusiasts, as it was big during that time to run to forums to share your trip reports. With the likes of riders sharing their experiences of riding Goliath, what it was like, where and how it ranked on their top list, and how shockingly impactful this ride was to them. Along with it being well received amongst the coaster community, it was also received quite well amongst the theme park industry as a whole. Goliath's first year broke the top 10 ranking number 9 on the 2006 Amusement Today's Golden Ticket Awards Top 50 Still Roller Coasters list. Essentially, Six Flags Over Georgia had something special on their hands. What the Great Gasp did in terms of bringing in guests, Goliath would destroy those numbers and bring in swarms. This coaster was massive, a huge investment that was paying off for them, bringing in massive crowds that were backing up the highway on Interstate 20, as they would see the beautifully painted coaster that goes outside of the park. In 2008, Grammy Award-winning artist Sierra, being from Georgia, saw a chance to capitalize on the popularity of Goliath's impact and scale. Promoting her forthcoming third studio album entitled Fantasy Ride, Sierra would promote it by taking over Six Flags Over Georgia, sharing the experience with their family, friends, and fans as they would all embark on Goliath. With the forthcoming album named Fantasy Ride, and Goliath being the newest and hottest thing in town, Goliath's name for one day in September of 2008 was changed to Fantasy Ride. Although you would have thought that they would have had a bigger banner that would have covered up the entire Goliath sign, but guests still lined up for hours to get a chance to experience the atmosphere, experience Goliath in general, and better yet, experience Goliath with one of the newest and hottest upcoming artists in the industry. Sierra would sign autographs, pose for pictures, and eat giant turkey legs, all in good promotion for the album. Directly or indirectly, because of Goliath, probably more indirectly, but Sierra's Fantasy Ride album would debut at number 3 on the Billboard Top 200 album list when released. Directly or indirectly because of Sierra changing Goliath's name to Fantasy Ride for a day, probably more indirectly. Within the next few years later, following from 2009 to 2011, Goliath would grace the top 5 of the Golden Ticket Awards for the top 50 Still Roller Coasters, with Goliath peaking twice at number 4 in 2009 and 2011. With Goliath's success and impact over the years, it has made the park a must-visit for coaster enthusiasts and common families alike to make the trek to the dirty South to experience the monumental thrills of Goliath. Not often does one come to Six Flags Over Georgia to experience this hyper coaster and leaves without giving it rave reviews, solidifying Six Flags Over Georgia as a coaster destination. Goliath is still holding strong to this day, as the park continues to work on the upkeep of this ride, from adding new trains, fixing restraints, and often running 2 to 3 trains consistently even nearly 20 years later after opening. Although I still would love to see Goliath's orange and teal paint scheme return to its original glory with that impeccable gloss and shine as it once had during its origin. Nonetheless, this coaster still holds up, as I've ridden a good amount of hypercoasters and from different manufacturers, and what I can say about Goliath is that it is arguably the best, if not the best. It can be in contention as such as the best hypercoaster in the world, in my opinion. With changes and additions having come to the park since the origin of Goliath, Six Flags Over Georgia has complemented Goliath by adding Daredevil Dive in 2011 as the first ever Gerstler Eurofighter in the Six Flags chain of parks, revamping Wile E. Coyote Canyon Blasters, renaming and retheming it to Joker Funhouse Coaster, RMCing Georgia Cyclone and turning it into Georgia's first RMC coaster as Twisted Cyclone, retracking the former tallest roller coaster in the world in Great American Scream Machine, reprofiling and saving Mindbender, getting a dual single rail coaster in Kid Flash Cosmic Coaster, and lastly, at the time of recording, Six Flags is adding a launch water coaster in the world's first of its kind in the Georgia Surfer. Who is to say what is to come in the future for coasters at Six Flags Over Georgia, as they have added or revamped a multitude of coasters in the past 6 years as of 2024. One can only hope they continue to add great pieces and variety to complement the beast that is Goliath. The addition of Goliath changed the dynamic of Six Flags Over Georgia, essentially as a changing of the guard from the milder olden days to the newer thrilling future. Goliath's creation was a $20 million project that continues to give non-stop back to the community, where the return of investment is pure joy to millions of riders that have experienced it. This coaster peaks high in the sky, greeting individuals as they commute daily on the highway. This coaster's legacy is just that though, a Goliath, a larger-than-life coaster that helped Six Flags Over Georgia self-proclaim themselves as the thrill capital of the South and trailblaze as the first hypercoaster in the Southeast. And a great one at that.
We're here on top of Goliath. I led the group. How many steps?
272.
272 steps. I am tired. That's why I'm huffing and puffing. Out of fear of the steps. But my goodness, this is amazing views. Something I've wanted to do for so long. And you all are here with me on this journey, this adventure. 200 feet high in the air in this beautiful, best hyper coaster in the world. Oh my goodness. 2006 masterpiece, B&M Hyper. It's so beautiful.